The public is being conditioned to look symptomas. Satellite imagery confirms U.S. strikes leveled military facilities in Venezuela. The media frames this as a kinetic show of force. This is a calculated misdirection. The real threat vector is not the missile launch you see, but the silence you don't hear. Analysts at USAE and CSIS have mapped the new battlefield. It is not in the sky, it is at the bottom of the ocean. Every limited strike, validated by reports of cyber attack speculation, is an invitation to sever the state's central nervous system, its undersea data cables, and satellite uplinks. This introduces the doctrine of the blind Leviathan. The United States military is a data-dependent entity. Without SONO's constant flow of information, aircraft carriers are just 100,000 tons of steel. Satellites are orbital debris. This is the asymmetric leverage employed against a nation whose $38.5 trillion national debt prohibits a symmetric, protracted conflict. The escalatory protocol is not kinetic. It is a solvency crisis triggered by systemic paralysis. The objective is not to defeat fleets, but to force a default. The weapon is not a warhead. It is a switch that turns off the lights on an empire. This is not a possibility. It is a mathematical certainty. The pivot to limited warfare is not a strategic choice. It is a solvency crisis. The capacity for large-scale, conventional conflict has been priced out of existence. A state cannot project power when its liabilities exceed its operational reality. The math dictates the doctrine. The core liability is explicit. The U.S. national debt crossing $38.5 trillion. This number functions as a hard governor on military capability. As analysis following the Venezuela strikes confirmed, the kinetic cost of even limited operations risks accelerating a domestic affordability crisis. Every missile launched is a debit against a system already at its structural limit. Adversaries model this weakness with cold precision. According to CSIS analysis, Russia's strategic calculus is heavily influenced by the catastrophic domestic liability of sustaining an unpopular, high-cost war. They project this template onto the U.S. They know the financial and political systems cannot absorb the shock of a peer-level conflict. It is a documented vulnerability. This forces a pivot from both sides. The U.S. executes limited kinetic strikes, like leveling military facilities in Venezuela, because it is the only affordable option. In response, adversaries bypass symmetric escalation. As security analysts warned, every strike provokes a non-kinetic counterattack targeting U.S. financial and digital infrastructure. This is the blueprint, a launch on warning protocol where the retaliation is not a missile, but a systemic attack on the source of the weakness, the debt itself. The kinetic cost is no longer sustainable. The Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, puts the numbers in stark contrast. A $5 million main battle tank can be neutralized by a $500 first-person view drone. This is not a balanced exchange. It is an economic execution. This 10,000 to 1 cost disparity is the engine behind a phenomenon analysts call the democratization of violence. It means lethal. Standoff capability is no longer the exclusive domain of solvent superpowers. Any adversary can now access a form of precision air power for the price of a consumer electronic. This mathematical reality dictates doctrine. The U.S. cannot afford a peer-to-peer conflict where its high-value, exquisite platforms are traded for expendable mass-produced drones. The national balance sheet, burdened by a $38.5 trillion liability, prohibits such a war of attrition. Therefore, the state is forced into limited actions, such as the strikes on military facilities in Venezuela. These are not demonstrations of overwhelming force, they are admissions of financial constraint. Every cruise missile launched is a multi-million-dollar withdrawal from an insolvent account. This is the central gamble, that the adversary cannot respond symmetrically. This is not strategy. It is a solvency crisis expressed through kinetic means. The adversary response vector will not originate from a carrier strike group or a known military installation. The protocol for asymmetric retaliation is being refined in plain sight within designated gray zones that serve as proxy laboratories for systemic stress. CSIS reports confirm that financial and digital attacks on Western systems are being staged and beta tested from these zones of cultivated instability. Recent alerts regarding regions like South Africa are not warnings about domestic crises. They are intelligence markers for these staging grounds. These are live-fire exercises for testing asymmetric leverage against G7 financial and supply chain infrastructure. Every limited kinetic action, such as the strikes in Venezuela, greenlights a non-kinetic countermeasure from one of these proxies. This is the new battlefield cartography. Not a physical front, but a network of financial and digital launch points, all targeting the foundational liability of the state's solvency. The final escalation is not a missile launch. It is a system failure. In a command bunker, a NORAD officer is presented with two impossible choices. His primary early warning systems go dark. This is the immediate consequence of an adversary exploiting the digital domain, a non-kinetic attack designed to trigger a kinetic response. This scenario exploits a Cold War doctrine known as launch on warning. Strategic analysts at CSIS define this as a retaliatory protocol. Upon detection of an incoming nuclear strike, a nation launches its own missiles before the enemy's warheads can impact and destroy its command structure. The entire system is predicated on the absolute integrity of satellite and radar data. A cyber attack deliberately blinds those systems, creating what RUSI analysts term the fog of digital war. The commander's screen is black. The protocol, however, remains active. Is it a hardware malfunction, or is a decapitation strike minutes away? The logic of the doctrine forces a decision based on the absence of information. Fear becomes the trigger. To hesitate is to risk annihilation. To launch is to initiate global thermonuclear war based on a potential phantom. This is the asymmetric leverage. An adversary, unable to compete with U.S. military assets after a limited strike, such as the action in Venezuela, will not respond symmetrically. As U.S. action provokes cyber attack speculation, the true vector is revealed. The target is not a carrier group. It is the decision-making loop of the nuclear command. For the cost of a sophisticated malware program, they can force the U.S. into an impossible strategic paradox, demonstrating that the foundation of its ultimate deterrent is digitally fragile. This isn't warfare, it's systemic sabotage. The protocol is already established. Limited kinetic actions, such as the strikes that leveled military facilities in Venezuela, are not a projection of power. They are a declaration of insolvency. With a $38.5 trillion national debt liability, the kinetic cost of sustained conventional warfare is mathematically prohibitive. This forces the state into a launch-on-warning posture for its financial architecture, not its military assets. Adversaries have studied this blueprint. The speculation of cyber attacks following the Venezuela operation, noted by security analysts, confirms they understand the vector. They will not meet force with force. They will meet kinetic cost with asymmetric leverage. Within the next 12 months, expect a calibration shot. This will be a targeted, attribution impossible event against critical economic infrastructure. The forecast, based on threat modeling from RUSI and CSIS, is a 72-hour logistics blackout at a primary West Coast container port. The cause will be officially designated a cascading software failure. It will not be an act of war. It will be a systemic audit conducted by an outside party to test the true fragility of the U.S. supply chain and its response protocol under financial duress.